I thought maybe we would start by having each one of you introduce yourself, talk a little bit about how you got started with mob programming, and what excites you about it, and one or two of the challenges that you see, just briefly, and then we'll get more into the benefits and challenges later. Okay? Willem,
Sure.
Do you want to start?
Absolutely. My name is Willem Larsen. I'm the sometimes host of the Mob Programming Meetup in Portland. And my story of mob programming is I was working for a startup, and we were based in Portland, downtown Portland, Oregon. And we were sometimes doing pairing, which I pushed a lot for. And then I heard about mob programming, and that sounded really cool. And so I facilitated that a few times, and there were some challenges and that I couldn't figure out how to get over. It was clearly some kind of magic was happening, but one guy would do all the navigating, and he was the domain expert. We couldn't figure out how to break that. And so that and a couple other questions led me to keeping my eyes and ears open for opportunities to learn more about mobbing. And that's when I was recruited for Hunter, which Hunter Industries, which one could consider the birthplace of mob programming, although mobbing's been around under different names and different styles for quite a while. In fact, I think even straight up mob programming is mentioned in some early extreme programming book I saw recently. But so yeah, I've been down at Hunter for almost 2 years, or has it been 2 years? Time flies, and I've learned a lot and baked that into a game called the Mob Programming Role-Playing Game, which I made with a lot of help from other people with experience with mob programming. And that's Creative Commons. You can download that from GitHub if you just Google the Mob Programming Role-Playing Game. Challenges are ongoing. There's always something new, but I think the advantages are knowledge distribution and continuous forward progress. And the challenges are many and mostly interpersonal. And there's always some new thing to work out, but it's really just, I remarked on Twitter the other day that it's funny, like a lot of the issues with remote work are immediately solved just by mobbing, because mobbing is entirely a set of problems around communication. And so if you solve all those problems and you get expertise in solving communication problems, well, then remote work's a snap. And in fact, I'm the sole remote worker on my mob team, and I'm down here in San Diego for a week to meet with them. But months and months go by, and we're great. And we've talked recently about maybe I don't even have to come down as much because it just seems to work, mobbing even remotely. So that's my story.
Ron, you're next in the list. Do you want to go ahead and go next?
Okay. Yeah, I'm Ron Cortell. I am Agile coach, currently in a hotel room, so apologies if the internet starts going weird. There's not much I can do about that. Teaching a class here in New Hampshire on technical Agile. I started with mob programming a couple of years ago. I was working at a large health insurance company in the Pacific Northwest, and we've been doing extreme programming, pair programming, and we'd heard of mob programming, and we started experimenting with it. And Woody Zool happened to be in town in Seattle, and he offered to come over and give us a talk. So we got him in, and everyone was super excited. A couple of classes with us, and mob programming just took off. So a large health insurance company, Pacific Northwest, they're still doing it. I'm not there, but the legacy continues. But that's how we started. We got Woody in, and that cleared up a lot of misconceptions we had around it. But what I'm excited about is how much it facilitated our learning culture there, and contributed to collective code ownership. because we're doing dynamic reteaming, so it facilitated that magnificently. The biggest challenges, I would say, particularly in the early days, was hardware, just setting up the hardware right, and physical space. So we've got where to put our mobbing stations. They were our first two challenges.
Okay, thank you. And did I hear Shannon? Is that your name?
Sandy.
Sandy.
Sandra.
Sandy. Sorry about that.
Sandra.
Sandra.
Yes, also known Mobbing DBA. You can follow me on Twitter. So I've been working at Hunter for several years. I've been in IT even longer. I was there when Woody was there, bringing mob programming to Hunter. So I've been with the team since they started doing this, and it's been an adventure. It's been a fun adventure. I've just officially come over to join the team because the databases can cross the organization. So I love mob programming. I think that it's a great way to, one of my favorite things is that we're always focused on the work, on the important work at the time. We don't have the way we work, way we structure our work, we're able to stay focused on what is really important to the company. We don't have a lot of meetings, and I think it's really beneficial to Hunter. I've seen a lot of good quality software come out more quickly than we did in the past. I think, like I said, I've been there since the start, and there's always challenges in any time you're building software. I think one of the things that is challenging is the initial setup. What we do, we have some shared accounts and just the logistics stuff. One of the other great benefits is the learning environment, the continual learning environment. Just, I think that's been a huge benefit to the organization.
Okay. Jay?
Hi, I'm Jay. And I'm a little curious, like where everybody is. This is kind of a neat part of this puzzle. So I'm outside of Seattle right now, and I work at Tableau, and we've been doing mob programming on our team for about half a year. I discovered or found out about mob programming through stories from Arlo Belshi and others, and then I heard like these amazing results that Hunter was having. And Woody would say, we don't recommend mob programming to anybody. We don't actually know that anybody can reproduce these results. And I said, that's fine. Like maybe I can only do half as well as they're doing. It's still worth trying. So I would go to my team and I'd say, we should do this thing. And then everybody would frown and say, no way that could possibly work. But been through a few iterations of teams that are doing mob programming. And I'm really happy that we've done that. The challenges that we run into seem to be around organizational momentum. Maybe the people in the mob are enjoying it, but the people who are outside of the mob have a hard time adjusting to their way of life when working with a mob. And that's where most of the challenges that I've seen seem to come up.
Who do you include in your mob?
I would love to include every responsibility in a full cross-functional team. That just seems like a good approach. And also an important part of mobbing is that it's fully voluntary. So I go to the people that I work with and I say, you're invited to join, but not obligated to. And where we are right now, there are separate developer and tester roles with separate managers, and the developers participate in the mob and the testers choose not to. And there was already an organizational rift between development and test, and the fact that developers are mobbing and testers are not has deepened that rift.
And so, can you say more about the importance of it being voluntary? Why is that? What is that trying to achieve?
That's an interesting question. So a lot of what I'm doing is copying what I've heard from other people who've done it, and I learned this via Willem. So I want to ask Willem to answer that question.
That's funny because you said that, and I was like, wow, that's awesome. That's a good idea. I like that idea. Uh, I think, you know, I mean, to be frank, most practices are going to shine when they're voluntary, and when they're enforced, there's going to be just a constant flow of roadblocks and issues, um, and I think if you think in terms of like, uh, it's almost like an appreciative inquiry sense, which is a reference to sort of a protocol of organizational change, where you go, find what we're good at and build on that. Well, so if you find the people who want to mob, you're going to have success, and you're going to build on more success. And to be perfectly frank, there probably is an important role for a solo developer here or there, or in that bit of research or that project. I mean, not, you know, yes, some part of me wants to say everything, mobbing will improve everything, but, you know, probably not, right? And rather than trying to have a thesis that mobbing is the one true way, like it is, you know, seeing it as one really powerful tool in a toolbox of all kinds of practices, I think is the more realistic way and functional way.
I think mobbing is extremely powerful for sharing knowledge. If you're trying to bring people on board, bring your team up to the same speed, or if you have some, like Willem mentioned before, someone, an expert, domain matter expert, where you want to impart that knowledge and wisdom on more than the rest of the team and spread that out.
And so do you find that people will come in and out of the mob, or is it generally the same cast of characters?
So for us, we have our like regular cast, but because the mob is open, we have this huge TV. Anybody walking by will notice there's a strange thing happening, and they'll come and ask, "What are you doing?" And we'll say, "I'll show you. Come sit down, take the keyboard," and then they're mobbing with us without realizing what they were doing. And so we have random guests who are just walking by come join us, but for the most part, it's a stable group.
Yeah, at Hunter we have one of the ways we manage our work is an agreement with product owners that there will be a head count per project. And that can, in theory, be kind of fluid. We can always like do a short experiment where we leave, or we get an extra person. And we're always looking. I mean, if a product owner swings by, or anybody in any other part of the organization swings by, we're like wide open to have them sit down and join us, and it's usually lots of fun. And I mean, and folks can be tentative, you know, and but I mean, that's actually been really fruitful. Just grabbing a passerby and going, "Hey, you know what? Oh, you're curious? Well, sit down, you know, and here's the keyboard," just like Jay said.
Yep, we have lots of guests, even interns right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is Ron. We've been experimenting with dynamic team forming. So we were doing that kind of at the same time that we learned about mob programming. And what we found, so mob programming was totally optional. So when a team dynamically forms around work, it's totally up to you as a team what you want to do. Do you want to pair program? Do you want to do solo programming? Well, we say all production code has to be pair programmed at a minimum, but you can do whatever you want. But interestingly, mob program seems to have become the de facto way of working for these teams. And so as for people popping in and out, the teams change almost every 2 days.
So I didn't catch that. How frequently do the teams change?
Every 2 days we do we'll do another marketplace, and so there is some stickiness to the teams, but you're free to essentially move to any team.
Also, this is Sandra. My schedule, I'm actually on two mobs. I spend 2 weeks, I alternate mobs, so I'll be 2 weeks on one mob, 2 weeks on another mob.
I'm kind of on the fence too about, like, I mean, like, with the work that the dynamic reteaming folks are doing, I think sounds really intriguing, and I'm excited about it. And I've noticed that with my team, we've worked really, really hard to build trust, to build a set of working agreements that reflect truly who's on the team, not some abstract amount of team members. I mean, they're completely tooled for us and our needs and our triggers and our, quirks and whatever. And so we're able to be great hosts. We're able to actually leave our team and help other mobs out for a couple weeks here. But because we can know can come back, and we've got this place where we know that there's levels of safety that are stable. So I do think there's an issue there with how much work it goes into chartering a team. I mean, mobs need chartering just like everybody else, of course. And then once you've chartered a team, how reflective that charter is on those initial members, and how if they change, I mean, even one person on a team, that's a completely different team, right? And all the relationships that change, or adding an additional person, how many new relationships, it's an exponential increase, right? So there's a lot of interesting issues with that. And when I think about the challenges of mobbing, they're almost entirely those kinds of challenges. And the irony being is, we actually recently got like 2 new members that were like really awesome, get along kind of folks, and that actually worries me more than getting like a new member who's like combative and because it's like it's the pushback that is the creativity, and also allows us to generate new working agreements. Whereas when there's like a lack of feedback and people are quiet, you're like, well, these original working agreements reflected the folks who were already here, but now we've got new members and nothing is reflecting what they need. And now, like, so I'm, like that's the kind of things we deal with.
So this actually touches on one of the questions I wanted to ask, and that is that sometimes engineers from underrepresented groups find that any kind of meeting is challenging. You see things like they'll jump in with a suggestion or an idea, not be heard, only to find that that same suggestion or idea is now said by somebody else and accepted by the group. And we actually had an experience of that in the mobbing sessions that we had here. And so I would imagine that those kinds of things come up. Is that your experience, and is that part of the working agreements that you have to work through as part of a group that mobs?
We do have to do that, and we use the retrospective tool to refine those frequently when that comes up. When we add a new member to the team, we want to retrospect fairly quickly within the first couple of weeks and try to really make sure we're addressing those as soon as possible.
Yeah.
My team actually uses the Hunter Mob Timer TM that you can get off of GitHub, and it is you put in all the names of your team members, and then that's your built-in rotation. Well, we've been because we're too lazy to actually add features. It's a bit of Python software. We are inserting stages into the rotation, like retro. So we retro every like mob Pomodoro. We call it Mobodoros. We have like a 5-minute retro, and then we have put a break in as one of the mob rotation, members, and we put in a planning segment. And so we built in a reflection loop, because yes, if we haven't had, I mean, so this is my feeling, like I'm always like trying to raise my standard for what we can get out of mobbing, and I'm coming to feel that if there isn't at least one awkward conversation in a work week, there's probably something that's gonna lead to a blow up. And so sometimes I just, you know, I mean, maybe I'm a jerk, but sometimes I'll initiate an awkward conversation, maybe about like really spooky stuff like promotions or this or that, you know, and just to poke, like, does anybody feel like, yeah, they're not being able to contribute, and it's going to affect their pay or this or that, or not being heard, or like, you know, can we rub a sore spot and then actually surface a thing that's happening, because we do have several strong voices in my mob that can steamroll folks, even though they mean well, of course, we all know.
Yeah, so that touches on something I think you were saying before, where there was originally a dominant mobber who was really actually always navigating. What did you do to break that? How do you manage that kind of situation?
You know, honestly, although mobbing to a certain extent resolves some of that, like just being exposed, like in that situation, we were able to only do like an hour session here, like, you know, every once a week, or, you know, a couple hours on a Friday, you know, but now it's like a continuous river of, you know, of an expert with a lot of knowledge, maybe just navigating, and everybody sees. But we have done loads and loads of experience in cracking that and getting other people to navigate, and it's still under study. But I would say one funny thing we stumbled onto was the expert was gone for a couple days. We're like, our expert's gone, and then lo and behold, we like started navigating, and we put all the bits together, and we were like, well, okay, this and this, and we already solved that problem in this part of the code base. Let's look at it. Oh, okay, I kind of remember him doing that. Okay, and so you know, like there's all kinds of. I mean, mobbing is it's just like a bucket for figuring these things out. Like, there's no silver bullet, but it's like we're always moving forward. I think that's the most remarkable part of it, even when our domain expert is sick or on vacation, you know, and lo and behold, we can still do it.
So I don't want to dominate the question asking, so
I want to follow up on that last question, if it's okay. One of the things I've been thinking about with mobbing is that most of the work that we're doing to make mobbing work well is not specific to mob programming. It's how does a team work well as a team? Mm-hmm. And that's stuff that you need whether you're mobbing or not. But if you're not mobbing, it's easy to ignore those concerns and not address them. And mobbing helps bring those into view to force you to deal with them. And so questions like, is everybody's voice getting into the mix fairly is something that lots of teams don't deal with, but it's really important. And I'm glad that mobbing helps us, you know, notice that. And then there's a specific thing around that I use, which is sort of as a matter of principle, everybody should be speaking roughly the same amount. So at retro, I'll ask myself, do we see that happening? Or if we're not, like, why is it, who's not speaking and why are they not speaking, and start digging there to try to get that balance into the group.
We also feel that having a single domain expert is a single point of failure typical to your hardware infrastructure. So when the organization sees that as a weakness and not a strength, then it's more easily resolved.
Nora, did you?
Yeah, I think you guys already touched on QA, and I think Jay, it was you who said, so they opted not to participate. But is there an example of QA participating, and also specifically if there is a QA engineer who writes automation around the program, how would that person integrate themselves into the mob and participate, but also have automation generated, or is that separate?
Yeah, it's funny. Some of the original mob members who are now have been promoted into software development positions, but here at Hunter, they were QA folks. I mean, I know for sure there's at least two of them. So that was baked in from the beginning. As a team, we write like Selenium style acceptance, cucumber acceptance tests, and so that's all done together. We all TDD together. Having said that, we do, all of us in our mob recognize that there's actual QA experts and testing experts, and we are not experts, and we are like blindly groping when really probably we need to hire an actual expert in testing and bring them into our mob. And the hiring, HR situation doesn't quite work that way. And we're like exploring like how could we inject that kind of expertise, because they would have to be like a software developer. That's the positions we hire for. We don't in the Hunter mob, we don't hire QA folks per se. That's not a title that's available to my knowledge. So yeah, so that's my perspective on that issue.
This is Sandra, being the database administrator. So I have a little bit of a specialty, which might be something that kind of what you're speaking to is how do you work with a specialty in a mob. And it's really been a lot of fun because I can travel to multiple mobs and join them all. And so it does work. It has worked well for me.
Yeah, like, I mean, whenever Sandra shows up, we're all like, oh my God, we're about to learn something, and that's mobbing, right? And we're all gonna, make eye contact with each other, and that I know, and you heard that, and we're gonna have a discussion about what we just learned, and I mean, yeah, absolutely. There's database stuff that we put off because that's not our expertise, and Sandra's the one who pressures us to like have the conversation. So yeah, mobbing is great for that.
Yeah.
Do you guys include any UX designers or?
Absolutely. Yeah, we've got a guy from marketing. So yeah, one way or another, there's a fellow who's officially in the marketing department, and he sits with us almost every day, a lot of days, and make sure we have the design right. And he's learning more about software, and we're learning more about how Hunter UI needs to look, and it's really good.
Hey, it's Ron here. Could I ask Sandra a question?
Sure.
So yeah, I'm fascinated about how you spread your specialty across multiple mobs. Is that planned ahead of time, or is it organic?
It's organic. So I have a primary, I started out with the internal mob as my primary mob, and then I was specifically interested in the Web Central product. So I worked out as half and a 50-50 schedule with one of my coworkers there. But I get pulled into a mob randomly at any time. The other day I got pulled into pilot for a database problem that they were having. So it's very interesting, and it's fun because everybody's really nice, and it's a learning environment, not a pressure environment. Otherwise it could be kind of a chaotic situation, but it turns out to be really nice and interesting because I get to go to multiple projects and engage them and then share my knowledge with them with databases.
Is that do you find that they're kind of willing, accepting, excited about learning?
Very much so. I was actually so surprised when I first started how so pleasantly surprised at the welcoming and receptive response I got from people. I was a little bit nervous about that going in, actually.
So
Great story. Thanks.
So Sandra, do you think that that's in part because they have an expert to learn from and they're not having to learn it on their own?
I do. I think that's one of the great things about mobbing is that I can share my database knowledge with people, and then I can also go and learn from the cloud experts the stuff that I'm really interested in too. So it's really a win-win. For me, I wouldn't be able to be, I would have a hard time being engaged without that opportunity to learn the new stuff. And, you know, we all want to keep growing. So I like to have more than one project that I'm working on.
So Sandra, when you're participating, are you taking a turn as a driver in addition to being a navigator?
Absolutely.
That's just a simple question about what are the rough sizes of the mob? How many people are involved? This is all new to me. And have you noticed different experiences in small mobs versus large, or how does the scaling affect things in your experience?
It's always been a really interesting question for me since we started mobbing. I've always wondered if there was a perfect size for a mob, and the mobs I work in most of the time are 3 to 4 people, but sometimes they go up to much more. They have a bigger mob, then it works just fine. I don't think we have any more than 10 on a mob, but
Yeah, it's funny too, because there's a few days in a row where we had 6 in our mob, which was a larger mob than normal, and I really like 5 as like a bot, because 5 means someone can be in a bathroom and someone can be sick and you're still mobbing. You got 4, someone can be in the bathroom and someone's sick and you're pairing, right? So if you want what mobbing gives you, you got to be able to maintain a mob. Pairing is great for what pairing is, but of course mobbing gives, I think, extra value. So to maintain that, it's helpful to have 5. And then, someone said, wow, you got 6 people in your mob, and that's a lot of people. We were like, well, yeah, it's great. But then like a half hour later, one person was called to a meeting, another person had to go home, take care of a kid. And like our mob was like chopped down to like 3, just like that for the rest of the day. So I think, this idea of fixed sizes and perfect numbers, and the reality is work is fluid, life is fluid, and probably what you want to do is plan for that, because our mob will also absorb like a person who's just had all their mob members disappear, and they're like, gosh guys, can I mob with you? So like that happens. They're just like, I can't do work now because I'm a solo. And so, just thinking in those terms of what is the project that you want to keep moving forward, and that means how many mobbers there is required to make sure that happens.
At Tableau, sorry. At Tableau, we use mob programming as part of a class to teach some technical skills to new hires as they join the company. And sometimes those are significantly larger groups than the ideal mob. Now, the class is not a mob programming class. That's just a tool that we use in the class. And one time we had an especially large incoming group, and we didn't plan appropriately to be able to split into multiple rooms. We ran a mob with 37 people for 3 hours. And
Wow.
like, the main lesson from that is you shouldn't mob with 37 people. The big challenge with a large group of people like that is keeping everybody engaged. If 37 people and each person speaks for 5 minutes in the whole period, that's 2.5 hours plus of talking. You can't really feel like you're contributing and be involved, and so you end up with side conversations and one person who dominates and people who are checked out, and plenty of those dynamics happen. So I have a pretty good sense of what happens when the mob gets too big and how it starts to fall apart. But I do plenty of, in that context, I do plenty of 10, 12, 15 person mobs. And I think that a little smaller would be great, but it still works. You have to kind of keep the rotation timer short, and get people moving and take plenty of breaks, and just keep the energy up in the room to help people stay engaged. So yeah, that's been my experience with oversized mobs.
Yeah, and frankly, I went to the mob programming conference this year, and learned that some folks are having a lot of success with 3-minute rotations. And at Hunter, I don't know. I mean, but we've been doing 5, 7-minute, 8-minute, sometime, you know, a lot of, I mean, yeah, like that length of rotation. I was like, guys, what if we tried 3? People have had success. And they're like, okay, it's an experiment. It's this week's experiment. And we did it, and it was fantastic. And it made us more engaged. So what's interesting for me, the lesson in that is when you have these edge scenarios, you got a lot of people to wrangle, and you come up with a solution for this like edge issue. Maybe someone has hearing issues, sight issues, we're too big, we're too small. The solutions that work for that often improve it for any mob, right? So I mean, I like anybody who's mobbing, I encourage to try the 3 minutes, and it might really work well for them. Like it might really provide benefit that you didn't expect. So.
I have another question. How, and I think Willem, you kind of touched on that, saying, I think at the beginning you guys said, we don't even know if this works anywhere else. We don't know if it's for everybody. How does it happen? And I guess, Jay, that may be for you too. Like, how does it start in a company? Is there an engineer who says, guys, we should try this? Would you ever see a manager coming back saying, hey, I have heard of this, I think you guys should try that? Or is that sets you up for, oh, the manager wants us to mob, we are not interested in mobbing? I'm just curious how it crystallizes so that people say, okay, let's give this a try. And is there anything that you can say, oh, if you do this, it'll, you have a bigger chance, or, classes or something like that?
Sure. So one of the things that I've learned about mobbing is that there's not one ideal way to do it. In every context, there's all kinds of different things you might change about mobbing, and some of those I've learned a bunch of these from Willem and from Woody and other folks, and I wrote a bunch of them down as a mobbing pattern language. So you can just kind of walk through and say, this one applies here, this one doesn't, and try to figure out the right configuration there. And if you don't know that, and you try mobbing one way, and then you might not get a good result, and then think, oh, mobbing doesn't help us. But it's just because you didn't turn these other knobs to be appropriate for your context. So having somebody who understands different ways of mobbing and how to map it to a context is really helpful in that situation. I would recommend that you start by asking, what problem are we trying to solve? Mobbing isn't the goal. It's a tool that is useful for some purpose. And the problem that you might be trying to solve is we have one deep expert in an area and several other people who don't know it, and this is a business risk for us. And we want a way to share that knowledge around without making that expert stop being productive in the meantime. So that's a pretty common one. And I would also say start with 1 hour a week or 1 hour a day, so that it's not changing everything that you know and breaking your ability to be productive while you're learning how to mob. The very first time you mob, you're going to discover that your space is set up wrong. Everybody becomes a terrible typist as soon as they sit down in front of a group to try to type. All of these things are going to go in a way that doesn't feel great and isn't smooth at the very beginning, and that's okay. And so you want a space for that to happen and be safe, and then recover from it and learn and iterate again when people are ready.
Yeah. I actually want to defer to Sandra on this question too, because Sandra, your desk was like 10 feet away from the conference room that original mob formed in. So I'd love to hear what it looked like for you as they were forming.
What I saw was that as problems arose, the team naturally reached out to the most people that could help them and asked them to join and work with them in their area. So, and that became their methodology, and it worked really well. One thing that, one way that I've seen us also start these out is small steps of just doing an hour or a couple hours, or doing it in the scope of a problem, instead of necessarily starting out to say we're mobbing necessarily, but say we're teaming on this problem and start building your team. Mobbing is really about teamwork. And so you can have a tactical team to focus on a problem and start getting those people together and introduce this gently as a concept. It's sort of how I saw it evolve. But I was the operations person, so there's a lot of need for people to feel safe and just to feel like, you know, we're all going to type, we're all going to hit the wrong key on the keyboard, we're all going to, you know, we all just have to be light about it and have fun.
Yeah, that's kind of what's happening, is that we have a problem and we also have a domain expert, and it just started to form a little bit. And we actually have a remote team, so I'm also curious about how remote mobs are best implemented. And then it kind of came up, and one of the engineers was like, maybe we should look into mobbing, and then it kind of fell apart again, and everybody kind of trickled their own way and did their own, you know, picked their own stories and worked in their own little areas again. And I do say that that was developers that grouped together and kind of tackled something, and QA was not participating naturally. They were busy doing their own thing. But we don't have a big rift, and they all report to one manager, but it still didn't crystallize. So it's kind of interesting.
So when you talk to people who have been mobbing, do you find that they'll start and do it for a while, and then it falls by the wayside at some point? I know that happened a lot with pair programming. I would imagine that it would be the same with mobbing.
I mean, I really only know my experience at Hunter, and where we, you know, our department is called the Mob. You know, there's no stopping now. Maybe even like to our own detriment. You know, there could be kind of like a we must mob at all costs when something, you know, I don't know that it's always appropriate. But I mean, and actually, our mobbing too. At some point I want to share a picture of our most recent mobbing setup, because now our most recent mobbing setup is a meeting table that we're all sitting around, we're looking at each other, and off to the side on the wall is a screen. And this is very different from like the two tables and everybody's looking at the screen, right? Now we've got a meeting table and we're looking at each other, and there's a screen over here, and we look, you know, or wait, that'd be this way. We look over there and you know, and talk about it, and we realized because communication was the most important thing. So anyway, I don't know that addresses like how do you stick with mobbing, but the idea, you know, mobbing is an environmental change as much as anything else, that's for sure. And if your environment doesn't support the more intense communication and the more human-focused, developer-focused communication, then it's not going to work. So.
Do you have a question?
I was going to follow up on the remote
Sure.
setup. I'm just curious how that works.
Well, oh yeah, go ahead, Sandra.
From the working with the remote perspective, it works really well. So when we come into the office every day, Willem's there. He's on a computer screen. He's got his office where in Oregon, wherever, and he's doing code just like everyone else. And instead of him being there, we have the screen there. When we have meetings, the team will even bring the computer around so that he can participate in the Kanban and other meetings that we have. So he's just like regular part of the team. Now, from your from your perspective, what does it take to set that up from your side there, Willem?
The challenges of remote work are they're not just technical challenges, they are the team's relationship to technical challenges. So I'm very fortunate that my current mob is 100% committed to making sure that I am as present as I need to be in terms of video and audio, that I've got speakers for my voice, I've got a good microphone that I can hear them on, got a good, I mean, we put a lot of work, I mean, it's like real estate, right? It's environment, right? And I mean, but that like just goes for everything in software. Like the setting up of the environment and the maintaining of it takes a lot more time than probably any of us wish it did. But I think that's the nature of the beast, that things worth doing require a lot of setup. And so sometimes things do go wrong, but things are up and running super fast because of everybody's commitment. And I have been on mobs where the commitment was maybe like 53% to keep in, and it didn't work so well. And, you know, and so like in order to make remoting work, if it's not a fully remote mob, and it's just like one person or two people, you've really got to go to have a team agreement, implicit or explicit, that we are going to make sure remote mobbers are as present as on-site.
But really, since we do so much, we value face-to-face communication so heavily, it is challenging
Yeah.
I've been on teams that had everybody in one place except for one person remote, and even without mob programming. And for a long time, I believed there's just no way that can work. But what Willem said is the key. It's whether the team itself is committed to making that remote person be part of the team. What I've seen a lot of times is the team says, "Oh, you can be remote if you want to, but it's up to you to make that work." And then when all that responsibility is on one person, they're not part of the team anymore. And it's true when you're mobbing, it's true when you're not mobbing.
And that's, I mean, to even say that, like Jay said that, and it gave me chills. Like that's heartbreaking to be that person. I was that person on a mob, and yeah, it's you never want to do it again, you know. And so like the human dimension of making this work is the whole issue. And I mean, and then that's why you want consent-based mobbing. That's why, you know, you can't force it, right? I mean, you know.
My current team is co-located, but we have chosen 1 day a week to work from home to avoid the worst commute day of the week. Somebody asked for that. We said, okay, we can do that. And it works out well for us, I think, largely because we have those 4 days that we're in the same room together. It helps us have the trust and know how to take turns speaking and all of those things that come together, they come up when we're together. And I think that's the only way that it would work well for us to have this 1 day remote.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, this knowing how to speak and when to speak. I noticed that as we've gotten further into the meeting, each of you are rotating through better and doing a better job at not talking over each other.
Yeah.
So I have a question, kind of follow up on, and it was some of the rationale for programming the having one domain expert and then wanting to share that knowledge with other people. And you can see the obvious reasons a business might want to do that or be concerned. So have you had, can anyone speak to experiences of where that one person then left the team for whatever reason, and how the momentum, you know, whether things carried on, or how did that affect morale? How did that affect the actual working of the team when you lose? It doesn't have to even be the domain expert, some key cog in the wheel, if you will. It seems like that's one of the real benefits. But does that really work well? And what are maybe some tips or pointers for when you have a dynamic change kind of go on to keep things moving in a good direction?
Well, so this story has a couple parts. So the first part is our director for solution of the mob programming of our software department at Hunter was that domain expert and actually solved that puzzle for his own purposes for his mob, which was the initial Hunter mob of like 5 people. and which Sandra saw forming in the conference room 10 feet away. And he was sick of always talking, to the point that his voice was getting hoarse. And he was like, this has got to change. At the end of the day, I can hardly talk, right? So for his own health, he figured out what to do. And meanwhile, like, you know, I've arrived at Hunter a couple years back. This is a few years into the mobbing. You know, he's now director. He's been promoted out of that mob. He solved it in this particular way, and I was having that same issue. How do you get the expert to distribute their knowledge instead of just always navigating? And I asked around, and people were like, I don't know. And then I was talking to him about it. He's like, well, I just did this thing. Or maybe it's Dexter who told me, who's another senior engineer at Hunter. Dexter told me that that's how he got really good, because Chris started doing this thing, right? And the thing was, well, something that we call in the mob programming game, the rear admiral. Chris, when it would be Dexter's turn to navigate, Chris would sit to the side and a little behind and say, hey, have you tried this? Or he would navigate at a super high level. Okay, Dexter, you know, try this thing, you know, and Dexter's like, how might one person do that? He's like, well, here's just one chunk, a layer of abstraction lower, but I still think you can get it, you know? And then he would just, how little could he drop and still stay as high as possible? And it forced Dexter to rise to that, and massive knowledge distribution happened. As sometimes this is made more powerful by actually that person, what we call the rear admiral, or the person who's navigating the navigator, who's navigating the driver. They can whisper in the ear of the navigator, so that truly, like, nobody else, like in the mob, there's not like crosstalk, or it's like goes right in the navigator's head, and then they have to explain that to the mob, like, what if we did this? How would we do this? And the mob would be like, well, navigator, if you told the driver these things, maybe that would work, right? Can start a discussion. But so it was a way of breaking up the loudness of the expert's voice and the domination of it. So that worked really powerfully for Dexter. Sometimes it works for us and sometimes it doesn't. And I actually think one senior developer in my mob has really mastered it, and the other one's like, I it's really hard for me. You know, when I'm navigating, I get into that place, right? So, you know, there's a lot of skills that go into mobbing, and there's some people who have absolutely leveled up and have that skill, and some people who are still working on it. And I'm still figuring out how to support a senior in getting that skill.
So this touches on a question that I have, which is, in the agile world, we developed Scrum Masters and agile coaches and the like, that come in and help a team to get good with the concepts and the practices and that sort of thing. Are we seeing a similar sort of rise of consultant experts in mobbing that are going into teams to help them with it?
Do you mean like internal experts?
No, I was thinking more external, or that mobbing becomes one of the things that the agile coaches and Scrum Masters are developing skills in to make part of their toolkit, something like that. Because what I'm hearing during this discussion is that there are groups that try it and they struggle with it, and even groups that have been doing it for a while. There's skill building on the team and for the members of the team, and so I guess what I'm asking is, what help is there for that if a team is struggling?
Yeah.
Well, I think definitely getting a coach in that has done it before is definitely a benefit. So when we were mobbing pre-Woody, it looked very different to mobbing after Woody's coaching. So our mobbing pre-Woody's coaching was very different to the mobbing we did after Woody's coaching. So I think there is definitely a space for coaching in mobbing, and it is another tool that us agile coaches need to put in our tool belt. But it does kind of require being exposed to it and having seen it and done it. So I guess it's going to grow over time as we get people move through that environment. I was kind of encouraged this week. I'm doing this training class, and I'm talking with some other coaches I'd never met or worked for before, asking them about the content and how they deliver. And both the two gentlemen that I was talking with, they both said, "Well, we do most of this class as mob programming." So it is getting, more widely used and accepted, which is good to see.
It's interesting that it's being used in the context of trainings. I think Jay was saying that as well. That seems like a really solid way to disseminate information about mobbing.
Yeah, I don't think there's any, as much as someone might argue about using it for production, I don't think there's any doubt that there is no better way to distribute skill in a group than with mobbing. I mean, yeah.
Well, and it's got the double effect of, one, it's a great tool for distributing, learning inside the classroom environment, and then two, they're learning more programming as well. So they're getting two things for the price of one.
Yeah, I mean, there's that old, what was it, the World Health Organization who did it was the Department of Labor who did a study on high skilled technical teams, what was the biggest indicator that they would be successful, and it was the absolute number of women on the team, right? Not percent. The absolute, so 1, 2, 3, and for each additional skilled woman that they had on the team, they had that much more success. And so what that points to me, so I've also noticed that there is this big emotional intelligence factor, that if you, whatever their gender or background, although, I mean, there's also been research that's shown that people who haven't had as much privilege, come from diverse backgrounds instead of all the same, that they've had to develop for survival, emotional intelligence, that pays huge dividends in a mob. I mean, again, it's all communication, and so I would say that's even more, I mean, whatever your normal technical coach, you need that bank of emotional intelligence to really shine as a mob. And in fact, at Hunter, to be frank, in our interview process, we are hugely biased towards emotional intelligence. I mean, we have a live coding interview, but we are looking at emotional intelligence, like how well you're communicating with the rest of the mob that's exploring the kata and is interviewing you, how much you are able to learn from other folks, teach other folks, sit back when it's your turn, step forward when it's your turn.
Good question. So in Scrum, the web development team is supposed to be self-organizing. And I'm wondering if mob programming can be a tool to help a web development team in Scrum to become better at self-organizing themselves, in their cross-functionality. Do you have any ideas, any of the four of you on that?
And there isn't a single mob at Hunter that has the same working agreements as another mob that is tackling their project in the same way. The mob that Sandra mentioned that was 10 people, well, they've divided up into 3 mobs or 2 mobs, or, I mean, they're just continuously, I think they even like roll a dice every day. They roll a single die every day to decide what mob they're going to go to, because they realize you could get siloed in a corner of the project. So would I want to do that? I don't know, probably not. No, you know, like, but it works for them, right? I mean, there's all these strategies and experiments going on, and if anything, my biggest concern is like making sure we learn from other mobs, because I mean, it can be kind of insulated worlds at times. I mean, Sandra wrote, you know, is lucky that she's an expert and can see these different worlds. Most of us, we're in our mob, you know, and for all that, you know, we've solved most software departments' communications for a single team, but now we're all like, oh my God, between teams, we don't get any, you know, like we like level up in that way, and it does, it can bite you, you know, and not communicating with other teams, and so yeah. Is that? I answer the
Jay
question.
or Sandra, did you guys have anything to contribute?
Kind of tangentially on that, you know, a self-organizing team and a mob, both of these ideas, I think they don't mesh very well with individual performance evaluation, and I don't really know like an answer here. I feel like this is a topic. These 3 ideas together, that if you put people in a mob, you suddenly lose the ability. Well, you never had it before, but it becomes much harder to convince yourself that you can measure the contribution of each person separately, because it's a team dynamic that creates the results, and that's a big part of what we want in self-organizing teams. You know, we want our incentives to be around the team results, not around individual results, and that's not a very coherent answer, but there's something in there that I think matters.
Yeah. So Jay, while we have you on, a while back you mentioned a pattern language for mobbing.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if you could talk more about what kinds of patterns are in that, and if that's available publicly, where would someone find it?
Yeah, it's on GitHub, on my GitHub. I don't know. I can send a link maybe later that we can put up somewhere people can see.
Okay.
And it's
we'll send it out on the, or if you added it to the conversation on Meetup.
okay. I will do that. Yeah, so it's called the mobbing pattern language, and some examples of things that are in there are like. We often talk about mobbing with a single driver and a single navigator, and then the rest of the mob as one way to organize. And there's a context in which that's valuable. And then another is to say have a single driver and then everybody's a navigator. And there's a context where that's valuable. And one of the differences in those contexts is whether people know how to take turns speaking and make sure everybody's voice is included. If you haven't learned how to do that, especially for a newer group of people or a newer mob, it's good to have the structure of who's the next navigator, who's the next navigator. And then there's another pattern in there, which is letting the driver participate as a navigator the same as everybody else. In a group where people really know each other well and the work is really unfocused right now, you're in a very sort of exploratory, questioning phase, it can work well to let the driver say, hey, I'm going to try this thing, what do you think? But you have to be really careful with that one. It's very easy for it to fail into I'm programming and you're watching. And so these are each 3 different ways for a mob to operate that have these different contexts where they work and different consequences. There's maybe 20 patterns so far.
So we have about 15 minutes left. Does anybody here have any burning questions that they would like to get in?
I have one more about how do you handle handoffs between your remote members that might not be in the same time zone. So if you have a remote member of your mob that's, say, for example, in Hawaii or Kazakhstan or India, how do you participate with them and utilize the expertise?
We don't have that because we would all have to work together at the same time. We have business partners that work in different time zones, but I don't think we're Willem.
Yeah, I mean, I would say is I have this thing that I tell everybody about, and that it may be really kooky, but I think also says something about sort of addresses what you're saying. Is that, I mean, the mobbing is a continual handoff, but there has to be at least 3 people face to face, just like we are now. This counts, right? Who are involved in that handoff, right? And at times too, where, you know, it happens at Hunter, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. So when you say like, oh, we got someone in Hawaii, they're in a different time zone. So like what I'm just not, you know, like when it's time to hand off, then there needs to be a pair that happens for a couple hours. And you talk them through it. Ideally though, you're spending half the day with them, and you know, and you each make a little sacrifice in terms of time zones. Someone gets up a little earlier, someone goes to bed a little later. In theory, you could have a global mob that one person is in each time zone, right? And you know, there's always 3 together, and at least, and it's like, and it just rotates, right? And there's never a handoff, right? Because even for us, I'm constantly, someone's in the bathroom, someone's in a meeting. So, HR called, wants to talk to you. Oh, someone's on vacation. Like, it just happens all the time. I can't tell you how much our mob shifts, but the fact that there's like, you know, really there's always like 2 or 3 of us that are still the same core, you know, that in, you know, in anyone's length of time, there's a through line there. It makes it work. So.
It sounds like promiscuous mobbing.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Someone is gone from the mob, when someone steps out and is, you know, preoccupied with another task and they return, how does that, how much effort is there to catch them up, or are they just, okay, you're back and here we go again, and you guys don't skip a beat and you just move ahead? Or is that different with different teams? I would assume to some degree different teams have rules that kind of speak to that perhaps, but how do you keep the herd all together kind of, even when these life things happen?
In my groups, we take the time to bring the person up to speed, because the idea is that there's no point in mobbing with somebody that isn't there with you at right then. So when someone comes back, you need to bring them up to speed, hopefully quickly, as you know. But we do take the time to bring people up to speed when they come back. I think it's important to keep everybody on the same page, so we're all learning the same thing, we're all engaged. One of the big things about mobbing is that we've all made an agreement. So we want to, when someone steps out and they've missed that chance to participate, we want to bring them in as quickly as possible.
Do you have any tools that you use to do that?
I mean, it's funny you ask this question, because we have a member who is stepped out to spend some time with another mob, actually Sandra's mob, and that's something we do at Hunter. You can go anywhere for 2 weeks and try something new, regardless of head count. But when he comes back, for whatever reason, maybe everybody in Sandra's mob, they're on vacation, or you know, it's one of those situations where he comes back for like an afternoon or a day. If it, you know, it's all context, right? Depending on the person, they might sit down and you might go, oh, great, this will be like rubber ducky debugging. Us catching you up to speed will help us think through, because we've all been stuck in this problem, right? However, with this particular mobber, he sits down and we're like, you just need to just sit there and we're going to keep going and we're going to move through this problem. And when we're ready to tell you what's going on, we're going to tell you, right? Just because of the dynamic of our mob, right? And he knows, he's like, yes, you are correct. The way our conversations go, I know I just need to sit here. And when you're ready to start filling me in, or I can ask a single question here, a single question there. But you know, like when someone has gone and come back and they like demand to be caught up and you're like, you know, it's like, it can be agonizing, right? And it feels like really jarring, pulls you out of context. So it just, you know, like with all things, it depends. And we have made a working agreement around this. Like it's where, you know, and we will remake it when we realize, you know what, it doesn't matter. You know, we'll catch you up right when you sit down. We've decided it's not a big deal, but we're always reflecting on that.
And I guess we do have self-organizing teams. You can see every team doesn't do it the same way.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can step out. If you've been working on a project, you can step out. A lot of times you can step away and you still have the context of the overall project, what's going on in the project. You're just missing the slight details that you can be brought up to speed or come up to speed with pretty quickly for the most part.
Yeah, honestly, I would say a lot about that the difference between what I said and what Sandra said is that it just depends on the privilege and power level of the mobber. The more junior the mobber, actually, the more we're like, okay, here's what we're doing and this is why, and does that make sense? But like the more senior we are, we're like, their voice is just too loud and it pulls us out of where we're at in the problem, right? And also they have enough seniority that they can lump it. You know, they're not, you're like, well, I feel unheard. You know, like, well, you're crying all the way to the bank, I'm sure, on that one. So.
Okay, so we're down to 8 minutes, and so I wanted to give each of you an opportunity to leave us with some final words, whatever comes to mind, advice or things to watch out for, hopes, wishes, dreams.
I'll start.
Okay.
To me, mobbing is about teamwork at its very core, and so all those things we can do to facilitate teamwork and just be considerate and be nice and be good will help us.
Thank you.
I'll go next. So mobbing is another tool for your toolkit. So try it out, learn it, and once you've got it, you'll know when to pull that tool out.
There's something that I heard from Woody not too long ago. He's saying we're really at the beginning of mobbing. And we don't know what it'll look like 10, 20 years from now. If we'll even be thinking of what we're doing then as somehow the same as what we're doing now. So I think it's amazing the results that Hunter has had, and I want to learn from and copy as much as I can. But I also know that, you know, we're continuing to learn. I'm watching mobbing change, and none of this is set in stone. I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, and mobbing is, I mean, it really is a skill. So if you try it and it doesn't work, there are so many resources. There is an entire conference around mobbing in Boston every year in the spring. There is Jay's pattern language. There's the mob programming role-playing game. There are coaches who have experience with mobbing. And you can come visit us at Hunter. We love guests for whatever reason. and we just get a huge kick out of inviting guests to sit down and get a keyboard under their fingers and really mob with us. And so there's so much opportunity. and we are just getting started. So we're hoping somebody else is going to learn something that's going to help us become a better mob.
Okay, we have 5 minutes more. And I thought maybe if we had a little time, maybe we could also mention the things that we got out of this that we didn't have before. I know that for me, one of the things that became clear to me is the opportunity for there to be greater mobility within the organization in terms of people being able to move around that mobbing enables. I'd already grokked how powerful it was in terms of knowledge transfer and how powerful it was in terms of enabling teams with remote members. But that mobility across teams, that's honestly pretty awesome.
I can go next.
Hey, go.
I love it. I love these continued conversations because there's always something coming out when somebody says something. There's always morsels like dropping out of a conversation that lodge themselves somewhere in my brain. And just the multifaceted aspects of mobbing, that it's not just, you know, a simple thing, but like you said, there is the dynamic that, you know, there can be mobility, and there is remote options. There are different types. There's teams that they implement their mobs differently. This now emerges as patterns almost, that you can have members that are there, members that are joining, and they're kind of like butterflies, mob butterflies. It's just, there's so much dynamic and there's so much to it that I think it's really, I really love that you all took the time and actually just talked about the experience, and it's just, I think it's super valuable. Thank you.
Yeah, I just agree with all of that, and I think it's, to me, I mean, all of this is new. I've never been involved in something like this. My first time coming to this meetup, so it opens up a lot of ideas for me in thinking about the way that I program just personally, because you always hear this cliches of, you know, we're all stronger together, and having different perspectives to a problem allows you to see a more rounded and often a better solution to a problem when you have different perspectives. And so actually hearing about your experiences, actually trying to put that to work and realize that gain that we're all supposed to get from doing that, and some of the challenges that come out practically from doing that. So the technology, and we experienced it a little bit even here ourselves tonight, but just some of the dynamic interactions and that freedom to form your own rules and to have mobs, hear experiences about the same style, but these very different experiences going on in different groups, practicing in theory at least the same thing. So that's very interesting for me. And then also just to follow up, I think it'd be really exciting if I was a new hire at a company and I got thrust into this kind of an environment. What an amazing opportunity to learn about the culture of a company, not just the actual technical aspects. That's really exciting. So
I think understanding the team dynamics and how much of an influence that plays, there's a lot of team dynamic studies out there already that we could apply to mob programming, and communications is one of those areas that's been heavily studied and looked at for success. And one of the reasons why I asked that question about handoffs is I was recently reading back through some stuff that I studied years ago about communications and teaming and handoffs, because we're looking at having some shift overlap for an implementation that's going to take more than one shift to get all the data migrated, and we're going to have to communicate between two teams at least for that data migration plan to be successful. So how are we gonna succeed with that? How are we gonna make sure that we know what the situation is at the moment where we're doing the handoff, and don't tie up the team for 3 or 4 hours to do the handoff successfully? So a couple of tools that come to mind are the situation background assessment and recommendations, which is a common tool that's used in healthcare, but it's also used in IT team handoffs for long-term implementations, as well as still being used in the Navy for submarines where it was developed initially. So it's kind of interesting to see that come back around and how it's used, how it can be successfully just really short handoffs of exactly what's the situation, what's my background on what developed or what contributed to that situation, where we're at in the progress of what we're doing, and then the recommendations for next steps can be a huge step forward in just that really concise handoff of information. And another tool was the I Pass the Baton, which is another acronym for handing off, and it's multiple things that you hand off, pieces of information. But maybe I'll post that in the conversation later.
Yeah, do that. All right, so we are at time. Thank you very much. This was fantastic. I really appreciate each and every one of you joining us.
Yes, thank you.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's- okay, bye.
Thank you.
Bye now.